Well, good evening. I'm JJ Ament. Thank you very much for taking a minute of your time tonight to talk about the state treasurer's race. I am running for state treasurer after spending the last 10 years in the private sector, but working with state treasurers from across the country to identify waste and inefficiencies and see if we could provide private sector solutions to fix it and actually deliver value to taxpayers. I've seen what works financially and what doesn't work all over the country, and believe me, there is work that needs to be done at our Capitol building in Denver. And so I'm happy that you've joined us to visit tonight, and remember to press 0 if you have any questions. And I want to be very specific about Colorado and some of the challenges that we're facing. Our state pension system right now, called PARA, has an unfunded liability, which is a fancy way of saying debt, of nearly $30 billion. That's almost $6,000 for every resident of Colorado. The state treasurer is a board member at PARA and has only supported proposals so far that include more tax money from you. Never a proposal that protects retirees but establishes a new system going forward that's fair to taxpayers as well. It's an enormous issue for our state, and we really do need to address it. In fact, I started sounding the alarm on PARA years ago. In 2007, for example, the unfunded liability at PARA was just $12 billion. And I say just. $12 billion is a huge amount of money. Imagine how much better off we'd be today, though, if we had taken action back then. And I sort of tell you that story to also tell you this. The state of Colorado rents 3.5 million square feet of office buildings around the state, and the largest of those it rents in Denver, 300,000 square feet at the health department. It's rented that building for more than 20 years. We could have owned it twice for what we have paid in rent. But the kicker is that we rent it from the government of Canada's pension system, while our own pension system is failing. Now, these are the things that need to be addressed. There's a lot of work in Colorado that needs to be done. Our state treasury, in fact, our Capitol building is starting to sound way too much like Washington, D.C., especially when it comes to fiscal policy and spending. In fact, everybody knows about the governor's mill levy freeze, but what most folks don't know is that the mill levy freeze that raised property taxes statewide was actually written by the state treasurer, and she testified before it in the legislature, and she actually testified for it in court against the side of the taxpayers. When the vehicle registration tax massively increased taxes on vehicle registrations in Colorado, it was the treasurer who wrote that law and again championed it before the legislature. So we've had an active treasurer. In my opinion, she's just been on the wrong side. And if we're going to restore some fiscal discipline to government, I think we need to elect a treasurer who really does have real financial and business experience, and that's why I'm in this race. So thank you very much for taking time from your evening to visit with us. I see that there are some questions, and I'll be happy to answer the questions as well.
This is Kurt. Our first question is going to be from Holly. Go ahead, Holly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for taking our questions, JJ.
Yeah, Holly, it's nice to meet you over the phone.
My question to you is, your opponent is still talking up a big-time conflict of interest with Citigroup, and I would like you to tell the delegates going to the State Assembly your side of that, and also he is still asserting that there are no differences in financial qualifications.
Well, thank you for asking the question. My opponent's asserted an awful lot of things in the few months that he's been attacking us, but let me address one specifically. I worked in the public finance department of Citigroup, which is the #1 ranked public finance department in the country. And of the 380,000 employees at Citi, we were a group of about 122 that focused specifically on public finance. So we had nothing to do with any of the things that you've been reading about in the paper. But more importantly is that I left my job to be a full-time candidate to prevent the very conflict of interests that are now being charged. So I have not worked for Citigroup for more than a year so that there would be no conflict of interest, because it was difficult for me as a financial professional who served state treasurers all over the country. There was no way I could run for this office at the same time that I was doing my private sector work. It wouldn't have been fair to my company or to my clients. So I left that. Now, there's still some language out there that my opponent has put out that I receive an income from these bailout banks. And what he's talking about is actually true. My wife and I have a joint checking account at Wells Fargo Bank, and that joint checking account earns interest. And so I reported that interest income, and this year it's been 93 cents on my financial disclosure form. And that's what my opponent has now plucked out and is suggesting is is corrupting income coming to me and my wife from the bailout bank. So keep it all in perspective as we continue to have Colorado unite behind us. I expect that our opponents will continue to come up with new and interesting ways to attack us, regardless of whether those things are based on the truth or not.
Before we take our next question from Jack, we want to ask the audience a question if we could. And the question is, do you plan on attending the Republican State Assembly this Saturday? And you get to vote on your keypad on your phone. Press 1 if it's yes, 2 if it's no, or 3 you haven't made up your mind yet. Our next question is going to be from Jack. Jack, go ahead, please.
Yes, JJ. I asked this question to you at the county assembly, and we're in a hurry, so you didn't have time to give a detailed answer. I wonder if you could now. Your opponent has what I consider a very good suggestion of moving the state money out of the bailout companies and Freddie and Fannie Mae, that type of thing, and moving them into Colorado companies at a better rate of interest and things like that. Could you respond to not the negative part, but what I consider a positive part, a positive idea?
Sure. And one of the things that prefaces your question was the assertion by my opponent that the state of Colorado has more than half of its investments currently invested in bailout companies. And that assertion is just false. And it's too bad that it has been spread around the state by my opponent when it's been refuted by virtually every financial professional that's reviewed it, including the former Deputy State Treasurer, Dr. Dick Murphy, who was Deputy Treasurer under Mike Kaufman and Roy Romer both. So no politics there, just financial facts. So that's the first thing that needs to be cleared up, is that the state does not have more than $3.5 billion invested in bailout companies. It's just false. Now, the notion of moving money from Colorado investments back into Colorado, I'm totally for. But I think those decisions need to be based on what is good, sound fiscal and investment policy, and based on the market conditions at the time. And one of the things that has been promoted by my opponent, however, is that the state should invest in municipal government spending. So in other words, buying the municipal debt or the spending that's been securitized into debt of local governments. And there are a lot of financial reasons why that sounds fine but is not a good idea from an investment policy. Most importantly is that the state of Colorado's treasury is not a taxpayer. So investing in securities that derive their value from a tax exemption just doesn't make any financial sense in the first place. But secondly, you have to be very careful that the state has very specific investment parameters that are set by the legislature that the treasurer must follow. And the key thing to remember is that safety comes before every other concern. You don't send your money into the government so that the state treasurer can pretend to be a day trader with it. You cannot lose the taxpayers' money. So safety must come first. The second most important thing for the treasurer when investing is to remember liquidity. After all, it's really the treasurer's job to make sure that when the government writes a check, that check can be cashed. And so liquidity is critical. Liquidity also is important because liquid securities are very transparent in terms of their price and in terms of their value. So I think the Treasury needs to do a much better job of letting taxpayers know the actual value of the securities that are in the portfolio, and that means liquidity is important. And finally, the last consideration is yield and getting the maximum return. And what's been misstated so often by my opponent is that he'll take the yield on a 20-year security and suggest that it would fit into the state's portfolio, which can't be invested longer than 5 years. And so there's been a lot of misinformation about that. In fact, the three private companies my opponent suggests that we invest in each issue what's called non-investment grade bonds, which is a fancy way of saying junk bonds. And in fact, it's illegal for the state treasurer to invest in those securities, and on purpose. We don't want the state taxpayer money being exposed to that kind of risk. So the bottom line is I'm all for investing in Colorado, but all the investment decisions we make, no matter where the companies exist, will be based on what are good, sound financial fundamentals, and then based on the market conditions at the time. And you can learn a lot more about our plan to do that if you go to our website, which is www.jjament.com. There's lots more on there about the state's investment policy, and we specifically point out the errors in my opponent's document so that you can see that we're not just making this up.